Welcome back. So, today we will start with lecture 2. We are in module 1. So, in the first lecture of this module, we have discussed about how society and language have an interaction at various levels. So, while introducing that topic, we have talked about the linguistic perspective, more importantly the socio-linguistic perspective as to how language and society interaction studies from linguistics angle started and what were the initial stages, who were the initial scholars and so on. So, we have discussed about the beginning of sociolinguistics, we have traced the history and talked about the a few of the main scholars, and that is how we introduce the topic. Now, the role of society on language and its use has also been studied from other perspectives, most importantly the philosophy of language and the domain of sociology. So, this is what we will discuss today. So, the one of the very important theories in this domain is that of social contract theory, which has been primarily attributed to Thomas Hobbes, John Locke and Rousseau. So, these three scholars we will be focusing on, even though there are many other scholars in the domain, but our goal in this lecture is to tell you about how the understanding of language with respect to society is not unique to linguistics alone. That is the idea. So, and a large part of this understanding actually can be traced back all the way to 17th century during the Renaissance period in Europe, where the primary focus was society, not language, but society, and then as a resultant factor of that understanding or analysis of society, language became an important point of discussion. So, that is what we will be doing today. So, the social role of language is what we are now focusing on. So, we have discussed the linguistic angle. So, today we will look at the other side. So, many other domains where language has been looked at and the social role of language has been explored. One of the most notable studies of this or the lineage of this kind of studies can be traced back to the study of society itself, primarily when the societies that were newly discovered. In the colonial period, after which the Renaissance happened. So, during those days the European, primarily white Christian Europeans went around exploring the world, and then they came upon new groups, new identities, new languages and so on. So, once these explorers were meeting people who were markedly different from themselves, that made them contrast nature with culture, because they already had their own standpoint was that we are the cultured race, we are civilized and cultured and so on. So, whoever they came across were put together in a different category. So, this is how old the study actually is, this level of this angle perspective of study. So, in the European tradition, the nature culture divide is what has been a very important point of departure for studies in sociology, in philosophy of language as well. This goes back to this time. So, at the time of European Renaissance, they had come across different unchristian culture. So, this is very important because this shaped a lot of future from that time's perspective, future studies, future analysis. So, because they came upon the unchristian cultures, they also realized that these cultures and these people, they outdated the European Christian culture. They obviously are older. Now, the immediate consequence of this was these new cultures that they came upon, these cultures were labeled as pre-Adamic, because they realized that these people have nothing to do with their kind of understanding of time and people and evolution. So, they are pre-Adamic or primitive, as they differed from the Europeans who had become civilized by the word of God. That was the baggage that they were carrying when they went the rest of the world. Thus, without having the word of God, that is the Christian God, these societies were considered uncivilized, or in a more neutral way natural as opposed to cultural. So, cultural is the white Christian people, and these are the people who are uncivilized, or you can call them natural. Now, when this kind of a confrontation happened, when this kind of a discovery of new people, new world, all that happened, there were many repercussions, but few we will be able to discuss. So, first of all, the most important for them was the religious question. That is where many things actually started, the point of departure. So, the main question from religious perspective was, they were wondering if all these people are still children of God, or how to put these people, because they do not fit in their understanding of the world or the people or whatever. Now, these are vastly different. So, how to put them, where to put them? Consequently, the question was, if their languages can be traced back to the original language lost at the Babel. So, the Tower of Babel, from after which the God's wrath fell upon humans, and then humans started speaking different languages. So, we lost the original language, was lost at the tower. So, is it possible that through these people, through their language, we can go back to the original language? That was one question. A philosophical extension of that question was that the nature versus culture divide. So, natural versus uncivilized condition. This idea, this debate actually remained very critical for a long time, and this also fit in nicely with the as an extension of the mind body dualism, which was already a topic of scholarly discussion at that time. So, Descartes and others, they were this divide between mind and body was already there. So, this also a new dichotomy also nicely fit into that kind of a discussion. Secondly, the Protestant theologians who were also the main scholars of important scholars of the time, they argued that Adamic language is lost, it is gone, and trying to find it or unifying the world's languages is contrary to God's wish. If the language is lost, that is how God wanted it to be. So, let us not try and figure out which is which and all that. As a result of which, the understanding of or learning of different languages followed. Now, the translating Bible into these languages was this was nicely put together, nicely argued in favor of that. Let us not try to get back to the original language, because God does not want it to be that way, and let us translate the Bible into their language, so that they can have the word of God. So, this was packaged as an act of charity. And now, this act of charity, basically evangelization. So, they wanted to translate the Bible into local language for converting them to Christianity, and this was marketed as an act of charity. Now, another very interesting fallout of this entire activity was the birth of the domain of philology. Now, if you want to translate something from one language to another, you need to learn that other language. Consequently, a large number of the scholars or theologians and scholars, they started learning those languages that they came across for the first time. They came across those people, they came across those languages, and because they have to translate, they started learning those languages. What followed was comparative analysis of multiple languages across the world, giving birth to the domain of philology. So, this is how philology began. Another interesting idea of the time was, again the Protestant scholars of the time endorsed that perfection in human life is not in the beginning, but rather in the end of time for humans. So, it is not like we had the best time, and then once we were now through evolution humans have become more and more in a less than perfect condition. That is not how it is, rather perfection will be attained at the end of life. So, the beginning of life is imperfect, end will be perfect. Now, how do you achieve perfection? One of the primary focus of these scholars was that perfection can be achieved through education. Education for them, of course, did not mean what we understand it today. Education primarily meant that you should be able to learn to read and write, so that one can learn the word of God. Nonetheless, education was favored because this is how you can become cultured. Remember the white Christian population, that they consider themselves cultured primarily also because of, apart from the word of God, because they were also they were lettered people, because many of these new communities that they came across were not having any script. Now, of course, we can discuss this is a very interesting domain in itself, but we need to shorten it. So, basic idea is that as an interesting fallout of this entire discussion between theologians and scholars in terms of what is nature, what is nature, what is culture, how is natural people different from the cultured people and so on. This has two important implications that is important for us in this course. These two are discussions in the domain of human nature and that of language, because language remains central because of the understanding of the original language that was lost and so on. So, and also because to translate Bible into many languages, need to be other languages needed to be understood or studied. So, these two areas had immediate repercussions. So, in terms of human nature, many political philosophers, so the philosophers that we will discuss today are all political philosophers primarily. Of course, they have talked about language and many such other connected things. So, many political philosophers have pondered on the two types of human condition as a result of this. So, the natural versus the artificial. What is called cultural is also understood to be artificial, because as opposed to natural. So, artificial as in how societies came about, what was the role of language in that, and how that took us away from our natural state of being. This remained a very important point of study among many political philosophers of the time. So, in the natural state, humans are free and amoral. Amoral does not mean immoral. Amoral is something like you have neither, it is neither, they are neither moral nor immoral. It is something that where the question of ethics and morality probably are not very important, that has not yet reached. You have to remember that the time that we are talking about is 17th century. So, morality and ethics and all of those things were ascribed to religiosity. So, if you are a Christian, of course, you will be following a moral path. If you are not, then you will not. So, this is but the natural people had not heard about those contrasts, that dichotomy of moral immoral. So, these people are amoral. That was one idea. They simply live as per their instincts of safety, self preservation and improvement, somewhat like animals. So, safety, self preservation and self improvement, getting better life for yourself and stuff. However, this is the primary crux of the matter, but among themselves they did not quite agree on the exact condition, whether the primitive man or the uncultured, the natural state of being, is it good or is it bad, that there is less of agreement there. So, Hobbes, for example, Thomas Hobbes, as we will discuss, considered these men as wretched because they are nasty and they are not really worth your attention. That was the primary thing, that was about nature. As for language, philosophers, many of these philosophers developed theories about evolution of language, though their point of departure was role of language in the rise of political societies, because these are all these scholars are from the domain of political philosophy. So, their idea of language was in terms of its role in the creation of political societies. But while they were discussing about the role of language within society, a very interesting repercussion of that was they emancipated language from religion, because this was a time when the division between religion and scholarly activity started, because Renaissance many other things followed after this. So, this was one of such important milestones. So, language was separated from religion as just as laws and ethics were also separated from religious thoughts. Till then, till that time, everything was considered to be part of religious thought. So, language and ethics were subsumed within religious studies. This was a time when there was a division that was created. That is why this was a great turning point in human investigation into language, as it started to get characterized as a human and a social invention rather than a natural phenomenon. So, it was a social invention, that is why we are discussing this, because these political philosophers during the time of Renaissance, they took language as a human invention, as a social invention, thereby starting the understanding of language within the broader social parameters, keeping in mind the social necessities and so on and so forth. Within this broader domain, one of the most important theoretical position is that of the social contract theory, as we talked about in the very beginning. Social contract theory primarily talks about that societies, the political communities, whenever there is a structured society in place, there is some amount of a contract. There is a contract on the basis of which everybody within that society are bound together. There are some rules. They might be written, they might not be written. Writing the rules happened a little later. When the society, when democracies came into being, this was still a time of monarchy. Kings and kings and rulers were ruling the very different kingdoms. But even then you can talk about how societies actually work on the basis of certain unwritten rules. So, that is the contract, social contract that they talked about. Thomas Hobbes is one of the most important pioneers of this theory. So, this contract is essentially imaginary. There was no physical document that was ever signed by all the members. So, it is not like also all members of a society sit down and sign their, like we do today. Like when we have to do an agreement with any parties, we sit down and actually make it a formal agreement. Formal paperwork will be there. That is not how it was that time, but there is some amount of an understanding among the members as well as between the members and the rulers. So, that is the social contract. So, the understanding brought of course, later on this is how constitutions in various countries came into being, but this is before that time. So, the metaphor was that political life was kind of a transaction. The state offers security and infrastructure, and individuals surrender liberties, follow rules, pay taxes. That is what we are doing even today. So, the state, now the state is a democratic state. Many things have changed, but broadly the structure remains the same. So, the state offers us safety, security, infrastructure, all the facilities. In return, we the humans, the common people, they surrender their liberties to certain extent. That is the, and that is how, this is the metaphor of understanding social contract. Western political, within the Western political theory, social contract theory traces to Thomas Hobbes, John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. These three people we will be able to discuss. Of course, there are many others, but these are the primarily most important figures. So, who was Thomas Hobbes? He was a 17th century political philosopher. By now, you would have already anticipated. The most important thing about Hobbes is that he lived at a time which was extremely important in the political history of the Western world, specifically in case of the British. So, he lived during the time, he lived and worked primarily during the time when there was this English civil war was going on in the middle of the 17th century. This war was primarily between the parliamentarians and the royalists. So, this is what I was trying to tell you when I said that this was still the monarchy was ruling the majority of the kingdoms, but democracy came a little later, but this is the time when the tussle was beginning. So, this happened in England, Britain as well. So, in this time, during this time, the tussle was between the royalists, meaning the people who supported the monarchy, thinking that the king should have absolute power. On the other hand, there were parliamentarians who thought that parliament should have the ultimate authority, not the monarch. That was the division, and Hobbes was on the side of the royalists. So, he believed in the supreme power of the monarchy. He believed in the power of the kings to decide what is best for the society. So, within this background, he wrote his book Leviathan, which is a classic that describes this idea of social contract. So, this is where he introduced the idea of social contract for the first time. It is a very important book. I would suggest everybody reads this. Pretty old, as you can see, this is 1651. This is when the book came out, but the later updated version, updated as in the current reprints are available. So, during this war, he put forward his idea of social contract. Now, what was the primary point in his book? The idea was that the monarchy should have absolute power, but with a twist. What was the twist? He said that the subjects are in a social contract with the monarchy to be governed by him. The monarchy has no contract, he is not bound by any contract, but the people, the masses are having a contract whereby they want the king to rule them. That was the idea. So, this contract is not binding on the monarch, but it is binding on the people. Obviously, for this very reason he was criticized a lot in the later times, but his philosophy still remains a very powerful and very important philosophy. So, within this idea he talked about the state of nature and the nature of state. Remember our nature versus culture debate. So, within this he discusses the division between the societies which are ruled by contracts and thereby they are cultured. On the other hand, the societies that do not have this kind of a contract, who are in the natural state of being, these people are solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. Their life is like this. So, this is a state without morality as far as Hobbes goes. So, men in such states, natural states, do not enjoy each other's company and are in condition which is called war. War, this is the old spelling of war, and such a war as is every man against every man. So, that is his idea of the natural societies, or what they called at that time primitive societies. Everybody is fighting with everybody else to protect themselves, to for their own self preservation and improvement. It is only when humans are united into an artificial society, wherein they give up major part of their rights and natural freedom to live according to a common law, that they become moral and civilized. That was his idea about the societies between division between the natural and the cultured societies. He also has talked about many other things, most importantly the idea of thought. What is the nature of thought, what is the nature of imagination, and what is the nature of memory, many multiple things. So, within his ideas of thought, he talks about regulated versus unregulated thought, and speech is part of the regulated thought. So, this is where thereby you become more civilized, right. So, language becomes a tool for your civilizing process. So, as far as language is concerned, he says that speech, which includes language, not only helps us communicate with others, but also helps us express our thoughts and desires. This is this predates the language and thought relationships studies by a few centuries. Now, however, this expression is meaningful only when we share the definitive meaning. Now, language is important, language helps us express our thoughts and desires, and helps us communicate, helps us create the society that we have created through social contract. But what if because humans are subjective beings, what if our meanings do not coincide with another person? So, how do you know what are the terms and relationship between them? The name, the signifier and the signified, is there a common standard or is there no common standard? Because human sensory perceptions are subjective, dependent on the individual observer's physical and emotional characteristics. So, as a result of which each person might mean different things, and at least shades of different things. So, how is it possible that we come to an agreement? Again, here he brings the rule of the monarch. So, how it is, so the meaning of words, terms and the relations and first principles, how does knowledge get created, how do we understand that there is a common thread? Here comes the absolute power of a central authority. For his case, it was the monarch. So, he will tackle this issue. So, in his argument, in Hobbes' argument, that authority is the monarch with his supreme authority, who will decide what is the standard. Basically, how do you standardize? In today's terms, we call them the standardization of language. This is how he put it. So, these are the primary points of Hobbes' take on language. So, he calls language a human invention, without which there had been among men neither commonwealth, nor society, nor contract, nor peace, no more than amongst lions, bears and wolves. So, without language, humans will be like animals, or like lions, bears and wolves. So, language is a civilizing agent that is part of creating the society. Thereby, he positions language as a socially and meaning driven entity. So, socially driven and meaning driven entity. So, this is the idea of Hobbes. So, these are the primary points, that it enables social cohesion, it is part of the socializing factor, and his nominalist perspective and emphasis on social function of language has had a lasting impression, that you can gauge by the fact that we are discussing Hobbes' work in 1651 in 2025. Now, other philosophers in the similar line are Locke and Rousseau. So, Locke, for example, though he says that God has created man, and he has given us language, but he created us as a sociable creature, and he gave us language because this language would be a great instrument and common tie for society. So, that is where the similarity between these three scholars. Rousseau also says that language was the first social institution. So, the social role of language has been highlighted by Hobbes and Locke as well as Rousseau. So, Locke also 1632 to 1704, this is the time period of Locke. He was a central figure in the Enlightenment, and and he made substantial contributions to the philosophy of language, particularly in his seminal work an essay concerning human understanding, that is 1690. So, in his philosophy of language, his focus has been very deeply, he has been very deeply intertwined with his epistemology and empiricism, his understanding on these areas, focusing on the nature and function of words, the relationship between language and thought, and the problems of meaning and communication. So, these have been his main domains of his work. So, words as signs of ideas, that was his philosophy of language primarily. So, words are arbitrary signs used to communicate ideas. Words do not inherently carry meaning, but function as symbols that represent the ideas in the mind of the speaker. So, here is a quotation: words in their primary or immediate signification stand for nothing, but the ideas in the mind of him that uses them. So, basically language is a language describes or language conveys thoughts and ideas. So, that is what Hobbes also said. So, this perspective implies that understanding language involves associating with words with the corresponding ideas in the speaker's and the listener's mind. So, you have to have some amount of there has to be a shared platform on the basis of which the speaker and hearer understand each other, follow each other. He also talked about abstract and general terms, and how words can refer to both abstract and general ideas which do not correspond to specific tangible objects. So, he made a distinction between these two, and he proposed that general terms like beauty, justice, like abstract terms are created by abstracting common features from particular instances. So, there are many instances from where you take the particular features you take from there, and then you abstract the idea out of that. That is how he understood abstract and general terms. So, his theory addressed the problem of universals by suggesting that general terms are mental constructs used to categorize and communicate about the world. So, all of these ideas today they sound like today they are given, but we can trace the history all the way to these scholars. He also talked about the imperfection and the abuse of words. So, noting that words often fail to precisely convey intended ideas. So, he goes on describing about that as well. How for example, rhetoric is used to obscure meaning or deceive, stressing the need for clarity and precision. Language should be clear and precise in order to mean what they are supposed to mean. He talked about understanding and communication as well. So, primarily he emphasized the conventional nature of language and the importance of agreed upon definition. So, that is where the society part comes in. One has to unless and until the speaker and the hearer and the larger audience agree on the primary definitions and what they are supposed to mean, there will be no communication. So, he has stressed on the during in 1690 work, he has stressed on the agreed upon definition as well as the social convention in meaning making. So, these are some of the because it's he has done so much of work. So, just some of the key sections and the key chapters of his work I have put together here of his work in 1690. And of course, Locke's philosophy of language profoundly influenced subsequent thinkers, and he had immense influence on the later philosophers, on the society, on academia in general, particularly in case of George Berkeley, David Hume, many others have been influenced by him. And in conclusion, we can say that his primary foundational analysis covers these three things, which are important for our perspective. Of course, it is much beyond this, but for our understanding of how language, society, understanding and interpretation goes back. So, these are the three things that we can look at. And last but not the least, we also talk about Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He lived in the 18th century, so 1712 to 1778, this was the time. So, his philosophy of language is also very important for our from our perspective. He made significant contribution in the domain, particularly this was one of his most important work from our perspective, again from the perspective of this course, the origin of language, how languages came into being. So, his ideas on language are closely tied to his broader philosophical views on human nature, society, development of civilization. So, he positions his understanding of language within this broader area. Primary understanding, primary concept of Rousseau in terms of language and its origin is that language emerged out of some natural emotive sort of an output. So, any kind of emotive output. So, when you are scared you make some noise, when you are happy you make some noise, that is probably how language emerged, that is his primary idea. So, language originated naturally from human emotions and needs, that is what he said, rather than through a rational or a divine process, because by this time the divine process was already being questioned. So, obviously, so this is not something that there was a rational process behind this, this emerged, this evolved out of natural human emotions. So, that is what he said. So, this was more of expressive and emotional, arising from the needs of early humans to communicate their feelings and desires. So, I quote, "Speech distinguishes man among the animals." So, you can see a similar kind of philosophical understanding about humans. So, Hobbes also said the same thing. So, the language or speech is what distinguishes us from other animals. Language is what gives human beings the faculty to formulate their thoughts, to express their emotions, to transmit their experiences. So, he believed that language evolved from primitive cries and gestures into a more complex system as human societies evolved. As we became more and more sophisticated, those cries, he actually calls them, many others also have called them cries of passion. So, if you are happy, you are sad, you are angry, you are fearful, this kind of emotive outputs eventually became more and more complex and they became more sophisticated and became language. In fact, later many theories of language evolution, this is one theory, there is also a music theory of language, and this is called the natural, this is the natural way of evolving of language. So, this is where Rousseau fits in. He also drew a parallel between the development of language and music, arguing that early human communication was musical and melodic. I believe that musical intonation was an essential component of the early language, reflecting the emotional states of speakers. This also has been taken up by later scholars and updated. Musical theory of language is also a very important theory in terms of language evolution. So, the first languages were singing and passionate before being simple and methodical. They expressed the emotions more than the thoughts. So, it started as emotion and later on only it became more sophisticated and it became a vehicle for understanding or conveying thoughts. That is what his idea was. So, this is one, and then language and social development is also another important area where he contributed. So, he linked the development of language to the growth of human societies, because the idea is that as societies became more and more complex, language also became more and more sophisticated. So, if you are looking at a from a shift from the natural expressive language of early humans to a more abstract and conventional language of the civilized societies. So, a language can be an indicator of the level of civilization of a particular society. That is how you can connect these two. So, this perspective highlights the reciprocal relationship between language and social structures, with each influencing and shaping the other. As language develops, society also develops. So, they actually go hand in hand. So, these are his the main chapters of his work, that for a quick reference. So, you can see Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau, all of them have tied language to the society's developmental trajectory. So, as society develops, language also develops, and language is something that is part and parcel of social life of humans, and this is what distinguishes us from the other animals. So, we are also animals, but from the rest of the animal kingdom, language is something that differentiates us, and this is what has helped us create complex societies, and this is also the vehicle through which we go from the natural world to the cultured world. That is the primarily these are the threads that bind them together. So, Rousseau's influence and legacy also is of course very crucial. So, his ideas on language influenced later thinkers, particularly in the fields of language, anthropology, philosophy of language and so on. His emphasis on the emotional and expressive origin of language as well as the social dimension of linguistic development, all of these prefigured later theories about the interplay between language, culture, society. Today of course, these are given, but Rousseau's ideas have been very instrumental. Many not only Rousseau, all of these three, or Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau, they have been instrumental in creating the later more refined theories about language, culture, society interaction. So, this is how we can conclude Rousseau's contribution. So, his philosophy of language offers a unique perspective on the natural and the emotional origin of human communication, because he emphasizes on the expressive, musical and the social dimension of language, contrasting with more rationalistic and abstract theories. So, this is a quick overview of the three views on human nature, as well as I have also added the views on language. This is for your quick reference. You can in one place you can find all of theirs. So, though they agree, there are minor differences between them. They do not agree completely on the neither on the human nature nor on the human nature as in the natural state. So, when they are not yet cultured. So, how are those men? Hobbes does not consider them very good, but others are not that dismissive. Similarly, their views on language, though similar, there are some differences. So, this table will help you have a quick understanding of that. So, this is where we complete lecture 2. Lecture 3 we will look up with some other scholars. Now, because Thomas Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau are not scholars that you can define within a few lectures. So, we have added some more slides as annexures to this lecture. So, when you get the slides, you will also have some more material that I have not been able to discuss in the here, but if you are interested, you can always look them up. So, that those will be additional materials. Thank you.